Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today on the OG Rose podcast. I'm here with Amar Numanovic, and I'm very excited to speak with him um, about all sorts of themes and ideas related to the book Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson. But yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for your time to be here today. I'm really honored and grateful. And I've been following you for a little while now, maybe over a year, and always really inspired by your example of, relearning things and always seeking to grow and use the hardships for the good, ultimately, I think. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure of mine being here. And yeah, those last years have been a constant relearning and improvement, but most of all, it's been like a recreating of myself by embracing all the hidden parts that my conscious side didn't want to see at that time.
Yeah, no, that's so good and so pertinent to the book, and I was really blown away by it. It's not a very long read, it's 118 pages, but honestly, like if one really takes it to heart and really takes it seriously, it will really change one's life, because but I think it's, I've been thinking lately about why change doesn't happen, or why, sometimes we think, oh, this feels impossible, or this never changes. Well, it usually has to do because like we don't want to change, actually, because it requires so much of us to do that work and to do that change. And so it's so easy to just say, oh, well, nothing's changing, and get kind of disheartened or nihilistic or apathetic or whatever it is toward it. But I don't know. I know it sounds radically, especially in this day and age, it almost seems like, I don't know how to say it, but maybe it seems like heartless to say that, but I do think, like, I'm just trying to think about my own personal perspective. A lot of things that don't change is not because it's not possible, right? It's because perhaps I'm not wanting to change it enough, because if I did, then I would be doing something more about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, true. Or another reason why we don't change is that the energy required to change is bigger than the pain we're having. So if our situation is comfortable, as a human being, we don't like to change. So if we feel comfortable, we are gonna stagnate.
Yeah.
Until the pain is bigger than the energy required for changing, we don't change. Or unless we get really disgusted by ourselves, then we are able to find the energy required inside of us, because at the end, the energy that we need to change most of the time, it's not from our conscious ego. Our conscious ego is actually the barrier that prevents us from changing. Because change, even if in the positive, it's scary for the ego, because it implies a loss of the executive function.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really good. I think too, it makes me think a little bit about Nietzsche, just in this idea that what are your own values, in the sense that what one wants, like if one realizes that, okay, like you said, we get comfortable, right? So we're not going to just change if we don't have to, right? It's like we're comfortable, it's working, it's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. So we just stay there. But that's why I think it's important, because in a sense, if a person doesn't want to change, that's okay, right? That's actually their choice to make. The problem becomes when we want to change, but we feel like it's this sort of complete, utter mystery as to why it's not, when really it's not so mysterious. It's because it's hard, and it requires acknowledging things we really don't want to acknowledge. And it also can mean action that's different than we want to be. Action requires that energy, like you're talking about. So yeah, it's I think that's important. But I guess what I mean to say is that it's change, is something that, I don't know, in a way, I think life is change. Every moment is completely different from the past one. There's nothing that you was it Heraclides or something, said, you never step in the same river twice, or something like this. So it's not, there's actually always changes the nature of reality. Sometimes there can be this idea that, well, look, like we're all going to die at the end, in the long run, so it doesn't really matter, right? Nothing changes in the fact that we can't avoid the fact that we are inevitably finite, etc. But to me, it's at the same time, everything is changed. So of course there's going to be change. You change your socks. It's like, I know this is so silly, but change is as everything about our life has to do with change. So I guess I'm thinking, why is that then? If everything about life is actually this change, this newness, this uniqueness, even in the same thing you've seen 100 times, right? It's actually, you've never seen it like that way before, really. But is there this illusion of the fact that it doesn't change, and that's why we get sort of, is it that comfort of that sense of like not wanting to having to move, or not wanting to have to, I don't know, I guess I'm just thinking, maybe one would argue then that, well, no, as you can see, our egos tend to favor not changing, so maybe that is more real. I guess I'm always interested in like what's the most real, and how do we kind of get to determine that, because there's an element of it which is always there isn't a part that we have in our own subjectivity of what is reality, so
Yeah.
What does that make you think?
So I agree so much with what you said, that change is inevitable, and we change if we want or we don't.
Yeah.
We constantly change, our body constantly change, the environment constantly change, but most of the time we keep repeating the same actions because they are familiar. And sometimes I think a human being, we are that stupid by thinking that by repeating the same behaviors, we're gonna have different outcomes.
Yeah.
And as Carl Jung was saying, one of the biggest sins of human, it's laziness. We are lazy because I think we all kind of know the work required to become who we want to be, to listen to the whisper inside of us, to follow our bliss, to follow what makes us most vital. But in order to go through the line of less conflict, we become lazy.
Yeah.
We avoid the work that we have to do. It happened to me like a couple of years ago when I really decided to change the direction that had my life. And I was like, by looking forward, I was scared by the amount of work that I had to do. And one day I was like, I'm gonna leave. So probably I'm gonna live other more 10, 20, 30 years. So it doesn't matter how fast I go. It's better for me to direct my life towards the direction of my best possible self than of being still here wondering what to do and how to do it, and being scared in front of the change that eventually I'll be forced to do.
That's really important, the element of our own laziness, and then also the fear factor. I was thinking this morning about how I might be able to get more done if I woke up earlier. And I was like, but it's hard to get up early, it's especially with having young children, and sometimes especially when they're infants, nursing during the night and things like this. The idea of like getting up early is just like, no. But I don't know, there was this part of me that says, well, it's hard, but isn't like that. That's exactly like the hard things are what is often required of us. Or just stop complaining. Like don't get caught up in, oh, I could have gotten more done. It's like, this is what I mean about this idea. If you don't want to change, that's fine then. Don't be upset with yourself.
Or don't complain.
Don't complain. Yeah, don't complain about it because you didn't make the other choice, and that's fine. But then like actually let your yes or no be no. If you didn't do the thing, then that was your choice, and that's okay. Don't be mystified and overwhelmed by, oh, how didn't get all the things done I needed to. Well, doing that maybe is requiring sometimes doing the hard things. And yeah, I think that's
and sometimes it's fundamental just to get out of our own way, to get out of the thinking, because sometimes I don't know if you can resonate with that, but how many times you wanted to do something, I don't know, to write an article, to edit something, and you started thinking about that. And you started thinking about that, yeah, I'm going to do it now, then I'm going to do it now, then maybe I'm going to start now. And you kept procrastinating, and the time went by.
Yeah.
By you just thinking about doing the things instead of letting go of the mind and just to sit and to do the thing. Because sometimes we let these our inner critic or our mind to stop us from acting.
Yeah.
And this part of us actually sucks energy from us, from the shadow, because we're not even aware of that voice in the background of our mind that it's actually stealing energy from us instead of turning it off and acting.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about that use of energy and just the thinking about it, or even just talking about it, right? Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Well, you haven't done it and you're talking about it. And I was wondering if the mind almost thinks that you did it because you said you were going to do it, but you didn't do it. And it's a sort of almost like this trick. It's almost, I have found that sometimes this is true with creative work. Like, it's very risky for me to say what I'm doing. Like, oh, I'm working on X thing. I'm working, whatever, it's poetry collection, whatever it is, as soon as I start talking about it, I do it less. I actually do the thing less. Does this make sense? So it's very strange how that happens. And I do think that's a fascinating, almost, I don't want to call it a trick necessarily of the mind, but it does seem to be this misdirection of the energy, because the energy, yeah, you needed your mind to decide what you're going to do, but then you need yourself, like you said, to get out of the way. So you actually just do the thing, you actually do it.
Yeah, it's true, because sometimes, even by saying things, as you said rightly, we consume dopamine, and for our mind, it's like we have done it. And then to more people we share our projects with, and the more we consume energy of that project that could be used. Actually, Marie-Louise von France, she was saying the importance of keeping the genie inside of the bottle. When you have some psychological inner transformation, or you work on something creative, it's important to keep it hidden from the light of the sun and from other people, because in this way the necessary energy is gonna grow, and it's gonna marinate in your inside of yourself, and then it's gonna give birth to things, because then everything in nature, it requires time. The birth of a child, it requires 9 months. Everything, but except human beings, are without patience. We want things immediately instead of preparing the soil and planting the seed that are going to help us to develop and to act in the way that we want. We want things immediately, and sometimes we even deny ourselves the possibility of growth by pushing ourselves in doing things that maybe it's not the right time, and then we have our shadow that comes and sabotage us, and we're not even aware why it's happening. But instead, from taking smaller steps daily and increasing the capacity of our ego to handle change with time, we want things like faster than we can handle. So in this way, it's like elastic that snaps back at us.
Yeah, no, that's very good. That makes me think of Rilke, the poet. He talked about, basically like, are you sure you're ready for those answers? You have all these questions, but you want the answer now, but you may not be ready for that answer right now. So you have to continue on and have an openness to the answer, but not have this expectation and demand for it, because that answer might show up and you couldn't even recognize it because you're not ready for it yet. But I want to ask, you said about this idea of pushing it so that it happens. And then I wonder, do you think this can sometimes get confused in the mind of how to understand the difference between laziness, right? Because somebody could be like, well, I'm going to push. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to talk about it a lot, but maybe this ends up making them not do it ultimately. But they sort of have this idea that they're going to force it, and then, but they're thinking to themselves, well, at least I'm not being lazy, right? Like, that's why I think it's so nuanced, because yes, there is laziness, and that's absolutely true. And so the push spirit, the spirit that wants to make it happen, has its benefit in that it's probably not lazy in some sense, but in a way, I'm trying to think about how to articulate this, but there's a way in which it's almost lazy about patience or something like that, right? It still has its own form of laziness there that doesn't look as easy to identify. And that's why it's harder to see that as problematic, right? It's like, oh, well, why is this anything wrong with the idea of sort of pushing it, making it happen? It's going to, instead of letting that, like you said, that beautiful gestation of the conception, right? Like the conceived child is hidden. Nobody even knows the woman's pregnant when she's just conceived. Nobody knows, except maybe she has a sense in her own body and her own intuition. But this, it's not seen for very long. And actually, it's this strange, there's this complete different formation that occurs, and then it's ready, right? Then it's time, and nothing will stop it. At that point, it is going to be a push to get it out, but it's the right type of time for the push to birth the child. So anyways, I'm wondering what you think about that, this idea of like going to the extremes that we do always as humans, instead of finding this beautiful bothness of like, okay, yes, there's laziness, but then there's like do, and push, make it happen, when really maybe it's not yet time. It still needs that time to marinate, right? Yeah, so what are your thoughts?
So from our side of the world, in the West, we are all for pushing, hard work, pushing. While in the East, we go and we have the way of the Tao, that where the master gets out from the way and everything happens. In my personal opinion, few times for example, for the New Year resolution, I wrote down some goals and I forgot about them. And then it happened to me halfway through the year. I looked back at those goals and I was like, how come I've accomplished all of them without even checking them? And sometimes instead I was pushing something, I would make it happen, but then maybe it would have been a failure. I don't believe that much in constant pushing, because if the constant pushing is not aligned with who you are, it's going to be just a waste. So I know people, there is this guy that he emigrated from Italy and he went to London in order to make money. So he started his own company in real estate, and he pushed that at the age of 32, this guy had a stroke.
Oh my golly. Wow.
So he accomplished his goal of earning money, but at the expense of his own health, because at the age of 32, he had a stroke, which is like super weird, which means that you pushed too much in one direction. And this is actually the same thing that all the Jungian psychologists were worrying us from, because when we have one-sidedness in our psychological attitude, it's inevitable that from the other side, we're gonna keep in the shadow and make grow all the other things. So if you're trying to behave always good with people, it's inevitable that your poison will come in the way. So, for example, I'm gonna tell you a story of my grandma. She's the sweetest person in the world, and she dedicated her whole life to make people happy. But the amount of poison that can come out from her mouth sometimes, it's scary. Because within her, obviously, there is this resentment. Because consciously, she dedicated her whole life to other people, and she was like the most altruistic person in the world. But unconsciously, obviously, she built this resentment during years that then, when you least expect, it comes out. And this is the same thing that Robert Johnson was saying in the book, that during the first part of our life, we put these all the traits that we don't like of ourselves, that society don't accept from us, in this massive bag. And our goal in the second part of our life is to take all those things from the bag out and to bring them into our being, in order to become a whole, not to become one-sided, not to become like I don't know, the person who kills his whole family at 50, and they all say, yeah, but he was a good person. No, wait a second. And this is scary because we as a human being, we're dangerous, we're complex.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not aware that inside of us are some inclination and some weird energies can literally possess us, we risk to make big troubles in our life by ignoring those things that we keep hidden.
Yeah. No, that was so good. That was really, really good. Thank you for the concrete examples, you know, of your friend who moved to London and of your grandmother. And yeah, I think it's, you know, scary is so true. It is very scary to face that reality, right? That if we are going to ignore that, if we are going to ignore what we tend to put in the shadow, then you know, it's, you know, it's those moments, right? Like in you wrote the wonderful article on your Substack where something takes over, right?
Yeah,
Everything everything you pushed away and ignored and wouldn't listen to, and you know, felt always called bad or whatever, then suddenly it gets its say, you know, it gets its time. It grabs the mic from you, because if you don't give it some time in working through it, in you know, and that's what I loved about the book so much, is that Robert A. Johnson, you know, he talks about there's better ways to do this, you know, and you can let it just take the mic for you, and then you do something very destructive and it's terrifying and you may destroy relationships, etc. Or you can do it in a better way. It's still going to be giving it time, but in a different manner, in a different context, in a different, where you actually start to give space for that to exist, you know. And I'm thinking about the two examples with your friend who moved to London. You know, it's interesting because the body, I don't know where I heard this. I really don't. But I'm always very fascinated in the mind-body connection, always looking into like alternative health things and all of that. And, you know, it's almost like if you don't listen to the body when it whispers, it's going to shout, right? It's going to get very loud. If you don't have time for the body's not going to have time for you. And it's weird because the body, I've been really interested in listening to Dr. Cassie Huckabee lately. Maybe you would find her work interesting as well. But she talks a lot about how the body only knows healing. So even the things that we call wrong are actually the body demonstrating and expressing its own attempt at healing. And so when we don't like allow for this, or we always stigmatize it, or we try to make it go away, right? Just make that pain go away. We anesthetize it. We don't always allow the body to actually do what it needs to do, like actually heal. And it doesn't always look very nice. Like a scab can look pretty gnarly, but what is it doing? It's protecting that wound. It's healing that wound, and it's bringing this skin back to the way it needs to be. So it's, yeah, to me, it's incredibly fascinating. And, you know, when the person is pushing, the body, like we do have this strange Descartian, and I mean, Descartes, I think much more actually nuanced and very intelligent. The reduced version of Descartes, I think, is problematic in the sense that we always think about these, you know, dichotomies and things like this, instead of, like, you know, Robert A. Johnson talks about in the book, Owning Your Own Shadow, where it's actually a seesaw. It's not two different things. It's two sides of one beam, you know? So your body and your mind are the two sides of one beam, right? So if you're not paying attention to your body, then it's going to make you pay attention at some point, you know, and it's not doing this to harm you, actually. At least this is Dr. You know, Cassie Huckabee's idea. This is actually so that you listen and that you slow down, or you, whatever it is. you know. So I think that's really fascinating. I wanted to say that, but I was wondering when it comes to your grandma, and thinking too about how the author in this book talks about these rituals or these ways to sort of give space to your shadow or listen to what your shadow is actually saying. What do you think is a good example? I mean, obviously your grandmother would have to find that out in her own life, in her own singularity, but like, what do you think, if you were her, how would you have gone maybe about like dealing with your shadow?
So, for example, even Robert Anton Johnson, he talks about in his book that we have to create some little ritual. I remember I had a situation where I was working for this company, and I had this really kind of lazy, heavy coworker that he needed to help me to do something, but like always, he never kept his word. So I was driving, and I was so pissed off at him, and in that moment, just something from my psyche started shouting while I was driving, and I was cursing at him. So I drove, and for 5 minutes, I let myself express my resentment. By myself in the car, I was safe. I was like smiling, but at the same time, I was letting this part of my psyche have its space. After those 5 minutes, I went to meet him, and I greeted him like my best friend. Because in my own space, I was able to express the resentment, the anger in a safe way. And then when I met him, I had nothing against him because his behavior is his responsibility. It's not mine.
Yeah.
My emotions are my responsibility. So I think when it comes with the shadow, it's so important to be creative. I had another similar situation in our romantic relationship. Obviously, when we are in an exclusive romantic relationship, it happens to us that we can like other people at the same time. And it's important to not have taboos and to express that openly, because in this way, you give some food to your shadow that in this way it doesn't come from the back door that you're not even aware. So you can express openly that you like someone else without acting on it. In this way, you bring the materials from the shadow into the container of the relationship, and in this way you're able to make it more whole, more real.
That's really good. That's really wonderful. Those are really, really good examples. And I'm wondering with the latter, in the romantic relationship, how I think a lot of people don't because they're afraid, right? They're terrified. If the person shares about feeling something for somebody else, then they're scared the person will understand, or they'll maybe judge them, or but how do you think that is true, that it's often fear that keeps people from sharing openly about that? And then two, how for you personally, were you at a place where or maybe was it the other person that made you feel comfortable enough to share, or was it like you just having to kind of have the guts to say that anyway, even if they didn't understand?
I think that when it comes to sharing our inner world, the only fundamental thing is that we feel safe to say it. Because when we feel safe with our inner contents, with our emotions, with whatever is inside of us, and we express it in the best possible way, also by caring about the other person's sensitivity, by expressing it, I think even if we have to go through a conflict, it's gonna solve it for the best. And I know it's not easy for a woman, because sometimes we as guys, we don't have the same sensitivity. We can be a bit more touchy when it comes to those topics. But I think if a woman knows how to communicate with a guy and to express it in the best possible way, I think he's going to become understanding.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's this element of, yes, I think safety, feeling safe with the person to share is one thing, but I think that we still have the responsibility anyway to feel safe enough in ourselves to speak that, Because like you
Yes.
said, if you have a genuine heart and you love the person, then you will be open about even the things that are not nice about you, or that are not you know ideal, right? Like it's not ideal to maybe have feelings or like somebody else, not that you're acting on it, right? Just even like just the
Yeah.
feeling of it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But so I don't know. I think you have to feel safe in yourself. I think you can't demand feeling safe from. Yes, it would be nice if you just could naturally feel very safe with the other person to tell them anything, but you won't be able to feel that way if you never actually take the risk of starting to be vulnerable again and again and
Yeah.
again, even when it's not easy or it doesn't feel like, oh, that went over so well. you know?
No, it's true.
Yeah.
Because I think this kind of safety it's built in a romantic container when both persons are able to let go of the tensions between them.
Yeah.
When they are able, because you can feel it when you're in a romantic relationship. When you can feel it when there are in the air unsaid things that
Mm-hmm.
are gonna inevitably to create. I like to call it the silence of the unsaid things.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just there silent, and there are a lot of things that you're not facing. And sometimes just having the courage of starting, it can help to release this tension, because we are like on a ping pong match, and if the communication is done with the best intention in your mind, I think it's possible to solve most of the conflicts that are needed in a relationship. Because most of the time, if there is no consciousness, it's all a matter of projections. So we project each other contents onto each other, and then you don't even see the other person, because you're interacting with the ideal image of yourself that you have projected onto the other person, and they're carrying this heavy weight, which is yours, which is not even there. And then the container becomes heavy, becomes like, as in the book, he talks about it's impossible for a human being to carry a baggage of 10,000 volts,
Mm-hmm.
because we are wired to carry 110 in our normal human consciousness. And when we fall in love, or when we project our ideal image, we are like, we are, I'll say, we're literally taken by those energy that become, we are, how to say, I miss the term, how it's called. It's like when we're like possessed by those energy. Yeah, literally
Yeah.
possessed. Something
Yeah.
something take over you, and you are possessed by those divine energies that are not human.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I love that section of the book so much. I feel like, gosh, I wish everybody could read that. Every teenager. I wish everybody could read it, because it's so powerful. And he really explains it so well. When he's talking about the voltage, we we want that extreme, that extreme feeling of the divine love, and we attribute it to humans.
Yeah,
And we are not the origin of divine love. We are vessels.
we're the
we are
vessels. Yeah,
we are containers for it, and so we must not confuse this topic, because if we do, we will like electrocute ourselves emotionally, psychologically, and this is very risky. And yeah, I was thinking really quickly about what you said with the having this ability to share openly. I think I wonder too, Amar, if what happens when people try to do that is they either start very emotional, or they get very emotional when talking about those inner thoughts and things, right? I really like the way you put that. You said the unspoken silence, right? All the things that were not said are really said in the silence, in a sense, right? And then this
yes,
tension between people. And I'm I'm wondering if this element of the emotional approach is detrimental to being able to communicate openly, because maybe from one perspective, the emotional is so charged, right? It's hard not to take an emotional response personally, or just the fact that, wow, that person spoke because they were really they wanted something and they didn't ask for it. Now they're upset about it, and they're gonna ask about it now, but they should have probably just asked before they were feeling emotionally or charged about it. You see what I'm saying? So it's almost like, come talk to me when you're not feeling so emotional.
Yes, yes.
That's one angle, but another is that we have different levels of, like, in the sense of, sometimes we speak different languages in terms of our emotional connection. I think we can learn that language with our partner, husband, whoever it is, person, even somebody, your deep friend who you're intimate with, like in a close way. You start to learn a language together, but it does require acknowledging that, well, we're very, people are very different, and some people connect more in the emotion, like the sort of just the I'm crying about this, and that's maybe more, tends to be a bit more, can be more feminine in that way of just sort of, it's just this expression of like, I'm all my feelings. But what's hard is to know if that's like the right place to talk about the constructive, what should be done, because it's just this sort of emotional almost like excretion of like all of the emotions. And I guess what I mean to say is that I think that it's sometimes hard to understand how that can obscure the topic at hand. It's not that emotions shouldn't be acknowledged or like can't be a part of that. They probably will be to some degree, but in terms of how we can communicate more clearly, sometimes it's better to talk about it, not in, obviously not in like the heat of the moment, in the sense of just talking about it when you can just have a level-headed conversation, and then let the emotions follow in the way that they do. As in, emotions to me are like seasoning for food. Okay, it makes it really lovely and delicious, or it can make it bitter, or it can make it sweet, but it's not the real meat and potatoes. It's not the actual substance of things, because that is our cognitive like thinking and our ability to communicate with each other. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't develop our emotional side, but I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to think back on this idea of the ability to have a safe place. And I wonder if it suddenly can feel not safe for the other person who you might be expecting safety from, because of that emotional volatility, right? They're like that kind of emotional volatility. So I don't know. What do you think about that? I can make my question more better, but yeah, I was just wondering about that.
I understand what you mean, Michelle, and yeah, it's so difficult to talk when you are in the heat of emotions.
Mm.
Because first, if the relationship is between male and female, one thinks through emotions, and the other one discriminates. So the woman is a yes and yes, yes and no, and the man is or yes or no. And in those moments, when we come into an interaction, into a conflict, most of the time, if the situation is heated, the relationship is not anymore between you and the person, but is between you, the person, and the psychic baggage. And all the pride and all the anger and all the domination, because instead of having a conversation based on love, you are most of the time having a conversation based on power. And when you're having a conversation based on power, you can feel it because there is tension in your body, because you try to dominate the other person. So in those moments, I think it's important to walk away.
Yeah.
And to come to the container afterwards from a standpoint of love, which is like a more relaxed, which I think for a guy, it feels almost like a defeat. It feels almost like a little death, because we have to put our pride on the side and to be like, okay, maybe I have to embrace my emotions. And from my perspective, it's not something easy, because I'm rarely connected with my emotions, as long as I think they are so much useful. Because even Jung, he was saying that in men, most of the time, the inferior side is our feeling, and our most genuine self and our gold could be fine could be found where the least we want to look at. So in our feeling.
Yeah.
So for a guy, in order to feel whole and in order to be able to take back the masculine, which is not only thinking, because thinking without feeling, it's empty chattering in the skull.
Yeah.
And to be able to gain back the feeling, we have literally to bow in front of something that we don't understand, which is something that takes over in your executive function, and you are lost there in a new territory that you don't even understand. And even in his book Aspect of the Masculine, Carl Jung talks about the importance for the male population to develop the feeling side. And another important thing when it comes to relate with the feminine, the woman needs to be patient, because the feeling side of the man is going to be primitive, it's going to be childish. And as you take a child and you help him develop, this is the same thing that you do with your inferior function, which is like the least developed side of yourself. And you have to help it to grow through relating by being patient, because if you are repressive, you're never going to be able to take back the vitality that's hidden inside of your inferior function, because it's like the foundation of your being.
Yeah, that's so good. That's really, really good. And I wonder what did, I know it's maybe not in that particular book, but what is it for the woman that she's going to be primitive with? You know, like if the man, it's the feelings, what is it typically? I mean, obviously these are archetype, but the feminine, what is that for her usually?
I think it's a discrimination and the ability to discriminate.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. And it definitely takes one to get outside of their comfort zone, of course, to develop that, you know, because it's like, oh, this, but that's actually, like you said, that's where the gold is, right? The gold is in the thing we feel uncomfortable doing, or feel not, this is not me, or why do I have to do this? Or everybody always understood me and I never had to develop this thing. Now, why do I have to develop this? But I do think that the feminine masculine relationship is one of the most powerful places for the alchemy, this type of work, because it brings this out. It brings out these dimensions of, oh, I didn't even realize I wasn't like using that muscle. I didn't even know I had that muscle, but I guess I do. And I guess I need to learn to use it.
Yeah, actually it's a psychopomp. The relationship between male and female, if it's conscious, it's like a psychopomp, because you're constantly relating to someone who's the opposite of you. And if it's conscious, if it's approached with curiosity, it's like the best place where someone can skyrocket their psychological growth, because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, and you're gonna be faced with the things that you don't want to see, because sometimes if you observe yourself, I think as a guy you would see that sometimes you don't feel that much, that sometimes you feel shame, that sometimes maybe you can even project the imago, the maternal imago onto your partner, and all those things take the eye. They takes the constant eye of awareness that is shed onto your daily life for you to be able to notice how you are sometimes reliving the relationship that you had with your primary caretaker in your actual relationship, by actually having an ego regression and behaving and feeling like the child that you were once.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's powerful about that is realizing that the conscious is to acknowledge that, but then also understand your own capacity to, I think today we have a lot of like kind of in like, oh, my childhood was this way or the other. And I mean, obviously there's something about that which is indescribably difficult and challenging and even painful depending on the particular situation. But it's always really like what's beautiful, or at least, and sure, maybe it's a type of having to believe this, but I'll go out on a limb because it's the one that provides the most hope of change and of agency in your own life, of like redeeming that, is to say I can acknowledge maybe the things I have become patterned toward because of this and this reason, but I get the responsibility of what I do with that now, what I do with that knowledge. Right. Instead of it just simply being like, I'm going to blame my parents or blame this or blame that. Because I know I can have that tendency. I mean, I'm really, really blessed to have very loving parents and childhood, everything like this. But it's so easy to just sort of sort of use that as an excuse, though. Like I'm an identical twin, so some of the things that I never had to develop some of the communication skills that other people did, because her and we could read each other's minds, basically. We're so similar and so close. And it was like constant talk therapy together. We talked about everything all the time. So, and it just felt so harmonious, So
that's beautiful, because at the end you need just one safe relationship in your life to be able to develop a safe attachment style.
Yeah.
And you said something so important, that most of the people today, they try to blame the parents, try to blame the past, instead of accepting whatever has been and deal with it.
Yeah. Exactly. And the thing is, you can even blame good things too. Like this relationship I have with my twin sister, we're still extremely close, and I can, it's a weird, I know it seems strange, but you can use the things that were very good for you as, it's almost like when nostalgia goes wrong, right? Where you're always comparing your now to your past, right? You mustn't, in a way, that actually perverts the goodness of that time, that season, that relationship. It's its own beautiful thing. But you can't, if you compare it and then use that as an excuse to not really ever cultivate difference. Well, that's, then that's a choice you can make, but it's not going to serve you very well in becoming the agent of your own life and having your own ability to say, yeah, I feel like I'm a complete fish in the ocean, a goldfish in the ocean, or a fish out of water, but I'm going to do the work I can. I'm going to just take it baby steps, even, and instead of using it as an excuse, realizing that, like you said, accepting that, the good and the bad, and then saying, well, but what am I going to do now? And then really working to do that. So yeah, I do think that's interesting, because we tend to think about it only in terms of traumas, but actually really, really good things can be just as traumatic in a sense when you have to move on to the next season of life that is not like that it was. And that, it's its own new beautiful thing. But if you're always comparing it, you'll never have the eyes to see what the gold that is right in front of you now too. So yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes we keep an eye onto the past by forgetting that the only thing we can do is to act in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes even the bad, and there is the saying that the worst curse is to be born in a wealthy family. I don't know who was saying this, Annabelle, I think.
Yeah.
Because after then you don't have the necessary energy to act and to do the change, because you have been born and raised with everything on your table, and you don't have any more desire to go after anything, unless you had like the parents were able to instill you this desire and this drive to become better, to do better, or to change your circumstances. Yeah. So even in the good, as you said, in the good relationship that you had with your sister, you were able to find the bad, because also in the best thing there's also the bad side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's interesting though is that bad side is kind of like what we often relegate to the shadow. Like we'll kind of either, it's weird with the shadow, it's like we either focus only on that or we just ignore it completely. Like, oh, this thing, the like you said, everything has its kind of there's always two sides to the same coin, right? So the other side to that is this underdeveloped, potentially for me, it's an underdeveloped perhaps ability to communicate, because again, if you don't have to do that, you never had to work at it. In a weird way, it was work, because it was day in, day out relationship of every experience, sharing all of that together. But it didn't feel like work, because it was life. It was just life, you know? So then, but when you have to actually do something, it feels like you have to do something versus feeling like you didn't have to do anything. That's the side that is, you know, what we could call as, it can feel hard, just like using your muscles feels hard. But if you just relegate it to like, well, I don't want to acknowledge anything of the other side of the coin, then you really do yourself a disservice, because you don't see the areas that you really need to kind of pay attention to and develop.
Yeah, because it's already there. If you acknowledge it or not, it's already there. The other side of the coin, it's always there. And especially also when it comes to trauma, people who had a difficult childhood, if they're able to heal their trauma and to have the post-traumatic growth, obviously it depends which a level of trauma you had, they are going to become much more resilient than someone who had the perfect childhood. Because someone who had the perfect childhood, they did not need it to develop those muscles, and they were able to raise to grow with I don't know, with more peace than someone who needed to go through struggle, but afterwards they were able to overcome it, and then your weaknesses becomes your strength.
Yeah, 100%. Oh golly, yeah, I still have so many different things, like questions to consider, especially when it comes to children and that dynamic. Like we talked about the male female, but the parent child is also another dynamic that presents its own beauty, but also for unfamiliar territory when you're dealing with like a whole different level of cognitive development and growth and things like this. But yeah, I unfortunately I do have to jump now, Amar. I'm very sorry, but I have to jump at this point. But I'm very happy we were able to speak today about owning your own shadow. I'm really happy about the things we did get to discuss, and I hope we can do it again sometime. That would be really great.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amar. Have a good evening.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.